At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Have you ever worried that a child you know is being abused? Given the statistics about child abuse and how many children you encounter while raising your own kids, chances are that at least one child you know is being harmed by an adult in their life. And the hard part is that there aren't always outward signs for you to see. And there are even more complicated factors that keep child abuse hidden. Even if you do suspect something, it's scary to make a report. I know that. And add to that, it's tough to even know who to report to. I've got child abuse pediatrician Dr. Shalon Nienow back. She's the Division Chief of Child Abuse Pediatrics at UC San Diego School of Medicine. Yes, there is in fact a specialty in pediatrics for child protection, and there's a system in place in every jurisdiction for supporting children and families. This is a difficult topic that Dr. Nienow will help demystify to help you know what to do if you encounter one of these challenges. As a parent, sports coach, troop leader, whatever role you play, you probably serve more than one role in mentoring and raising kids. And in that role, you have a responsibility to help a child if you see something that is concerning for abuse. It's far more hidden than you realize, and we're going to get to all of that. Please note that some of this content may not be suitable for young ears. I'm Dr. Wendy Hunter, and I'm the pediatrician next door. I'm that doctor friend you call for practical advice about your kids' health. I mix the science of medicine with the reality of parenting. This is one of the most challenging things you might encounter as an adult. Child abuse is heartbreaking, and we want to take action, but even that can be scary. Let's talk about the barriers and how this system works. I started by asking Dr. Nienow how we might recognize signs of child abuse. How might abuse show up in a child's behavior, and when should parents be concerned about what they notice in another child, like a friend, a neighbor, a relative, and what they do about it?
There's not any single type of behavior that indicates abuse is happening. In fact, most of the time, I can't tell by a child's behavior that abuse is happening because children don't know that the situation that they're in is not wrong, right? So this is just another Tuesday for them. This is the environment that they're living in, and these are the people that they love. And so you may not have obvious external signs. When there are signs of, let's just say sexual abuse as an example, then it will be symptoms of stress, which really are broad and kind of vague because any sort of stressor in a child's life can have them act out in a behavioral way. So things like new onset bedwetting, increased anxiety, problems sleeping, new difficulties in school, fear of particular situations. But all of those are kind of broad. So if I have a new sibling at home, that may stress me out and I may wet the bed. Or if I have a urinary tract infection, that may make me wet the bed. So there's a whole lot of things that can cause similar behaviors, but it's new onset signs of stress that we're looking for. Things like physical abuse, it's a little bit more obvious because you may see marks or bruises or cuts or whatever on a child's body. That's more objective. The subjective symptoms tend to be a little bit more difficult.
That makes perfect sense because I think we miss, and I know you know the statistics, a lot of cases of abuse in childhood, and people grow up and like 1 in 5 people had some kind of abuse in childhood. And that's certainly not the rate of reporting, right?
Right. 3 million children are reported to Child Protective Services every year. About 1.3 million of those children are substantiated as victims of abuse or neglect. When we do anonymous surveys of parents, for example, they will report beating, burning, hitting, harming children at a rate 3 times that of what's substantiated by child welfare services. So we know that we're under finding or under accounting for abuse and neglect. In large part because, one, it has to be reported in order for it to be investigated and to be counted. And things like child sexual abuse, we know that 80% of victims of child sexual abuse are not going to tell immediately that they're being abused. And they often don't tell for years and may not tell even until adulthood. And in order for that to be discovered, the child has to disclose it. So underreporting of abuse is really the biggest issue that we have.
Abuse can be very difficult to recognize for a number of reasons. Part of the problem is that kids may not have any idea that the way they are being treated is not okay. The other interesting thing that Dr. Nienow shared in regards to this is that we adults often might ask something like, "Is someone hurting you?" But sexual abuse usually doesn't hurt. She says a better way to ask is if something makes them feel uncomfortable. And that gets back to what we talked about in the last episode in terms of kids and adults knowing what is normal and what is not, and teaching our kids that their body is theirs. I know we all expect for physical abuse to be obvious. In fact, we are trained to be on the lookout for bruises during our pediatrics residency, but we are trained to look for very specific types of bruises that are more suggestive of physical abuse compared to regular, sometimes numerous bruises that you find in kids. So I asked Dr. Nienow about that as well. Parents joke with me sometimes as a pediatrician about the number of bruises that their child has. How do you distinguish between normal childhood injuries and signs of abuse?
Great question. So kids will bruise in very particular ways, especially once they're ambulatory. So when children are cruising, walking, running, and they have like forward momentum and velocity, they will frequently have bruises, and those happen on bony prominences, foreheads, chins, around the eye, elbows, shins, knees, all of those places. Once you're ambulatory, you can get bruises in other locations, but primarily on the bony prominences. What is most imperative is to look for injuries on kids who aren't mobile. Those are the ones that we're really concerned about. Our mantra in child abuse is if you're not old enough to cruise, you're not old enough to bruise. So any bruise in any location in a child who's not yet ambulatory is always a concern and should be evaluated. In our ambulatory kids, obviously, if they can disclose, hey, this bruise is from somebody hitting me, that's a worry, and we need to have that evaluated. Patterned injuries, so things like loop marks, bite marks, any sort of pattern that looks like an object, those are worrisome for infliction in our older kids.
If you know me, or bring your child to me, you have heard me say a million times that I worry about kids who don't have enough bruises. I always say you need to have as many bruises as you are years old, or I won't know you're playing hard enough. I love to see bruises on kids' knees and shins. We really do know where your kid should bruise and where they shouldn't. For example, if you see or I see a bruise on the ear, that is very worrisome. It's not easy to bruise your ear, and we worry a lot about that being a sign of abuse. In the case that you are worried a child is being abused, What should you do? I know how to handle this as a pediatrician in my clinic, but as a mom, I've found this more challenging. I'm afraid if I report something that the family's going to know it was me, or I may not even know who to call to make a report. I asked my specialist about a tough scenario I encountered, and that's next.
Are you ready to rock big savings? Rakuten's Big Give Week is a limited-time festival of savings. Just 8 days of epic deals. Earn 15% cash back at Ray-Ban, Lego, Adidas, and more. Big Give Week is only once a year, and the cashback rates are through the roof. Plus, your cashback gets sent directly to your PayPal, so you'll feel even better about your purchase. Join for free today and get a $20 welcome bonus. Hurry, Big Give Week ends May 12th, and there won't be an encore. Go to Rakuten.com or download the Rakuten app.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I'm talking about a subject that is really difficult for all of us, including myself, and I've had training and experience with child abuse. Still, as a parent and a community member, I wasn't sure what to do in this scenario. Here, I asked Dr. Nienow's advice. What if I have a child sleeping over at my house? Okay, this actually happened to me. I had a child sleeping over, and she started crying. She was sad. She was scared of the dark. And I went in to try to comfort her. And she said to me, "Don't get Black Betty." And I said, what are you talking about? I said, "Who's Black Betty?" And she said, "My mom's belt. Don't hit me." And I had no idea what to do.
Wow.
So what if you hear about something like that, or in the scenario that you think there's inappropriate touching in your household and you think maybe a child has been abused in their house? What do you do as a parent?
Anytime you have concern that abuse or neglect has happened to a child, or a child discloses to you as a safe person for them, then it's really imperative that you get investigators involved. If it's something that's happening in a child's home, that would be a report to Child Protective Services. If it's something that's happening outside of a child's home, or the child is in an unsafe situation and it's an emergency and they need an immediate response, then that would be a law enforcement report. You can report to one or the other because they are required by law to cross-report, but immediate responses or emergent safety issues really should go to law enforcement first.
The more subtle situations, though, can be trickier because you're afraid to report because you think you might be wrong or you don't want to get the parents in trouble. What's your advice about that?
That's such a common thing, and it's the number one reason people tell me that they haven't reported before, because they really feel like they need to be right. And that's actually not the statute or the mandate for reporting. The mandate for reporting is that you have a reasonable suspicion. Obviously, you don't want to report somebody when you have no idea and you are just worried you don't like them, they seem off. But when you have a reasonable suspicion because a child has made statements to you or you've witnessed something, then that is all that you need to make that report. And it's up to the investigators to determine whether or not abuse or neglect is happening. That's their job. And I think a lot of people get worried that they're going to break up a family or something terrible is going to happen. But the system is actually designed to help keep families together and to make them safer and healthier as a whole. So it's really there to improve family dynamics and to ensure not only that the child is safe, but the family is safe as a unit. And so I think helping families to understand that that is the purpose can really reduce some of that anxiety involved in making a report. And the biggest issue, honestly, is what if you're right? Right. So if you're right, if you're right and a child is being harmed or is in an unsafe situation and you don't report, you may have been that child's only hope, and not reporting is usually the bigger issue.
what should you expect after a report is made? What happens?
That depends on the situation. A lot of people don't want to leave their name, so they want to make an anonymous report when they call investigators. I would suggest that you don't do that because you never know what the intake person is writing down, whether or not they're getting all of the information that the investigator will need to do their job effectively. And so when you leave your name and your contact information, they can follow up with you and let you know long-term what happened. So they'll send you a form letter in the mail. We got your report, we closed it out, or we got your report, we're investigating. They will not let you know the ultimate outcome, but it can kind of close the loop. If you're anonymous, that loop doesn't really get closed. It is always confidential, and it's confidential by law. So they're not allowed to tell the family who made the report. Sometimes there's context clues, right? So if the only person that has seen the child that week is the doctor, and they're like, well, it must be the pediatrician that made the report. And so context clues, yes, it's probably somebody from the pediatrician's office. But for lay people and family members, community members, that's usually not as easy of a thing to figure out. And 100% your name will always be kept confidential. The parents or family members will not know who made that report.
I've found that when I make a child welfare report, often nothing happens. So what's happening behind the scenes that I don't know about?
So, and it often feels like nothing happens as a professional when you're making these reports, but truly something is happening. The issue is, does the investigator have the ability to make contact with the family? So if families aren't answering the phone, or they're not answering the door, or they can't be located, then sometimes those reports can't be completed. When the investigators go out, they will obviously make sure that the family unit as a whole is safe, and they aren't going to tell you the ultimate outcome, whether or not the report was substantiated. I think when we don't see immediate outcomes of what Child Protective Services or law enforcement has put into place, it feels like nothing is happening, when in fact they may be referring the family to services, getting them help with housing, or getting them help with domestic violence resources or financial resources, things that mitigate the risk factors that are in the household, but it doesn't result in a separation of the family. So from the outside perspective, it doesn't look like anything is happening, when in fact things are happening behind the scenes to help that family out.
Well, I'd imagine the family too isn't advertising like, hey, child welfare came in and I have to take mandatory parenting classes.
Totally true.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a question a colleague passed on. And that is, she had a 14-year-old patient who told her she had been sexually assaulted, but it had happened 6 months or a year earlier, but she was 14 at the time. And the patient asked not to have it reported. There's so much to unpack there, but what happens in that scenario, and what should the doctor do?
That depends on the jurisdiction and where the doctor is working. So here in the state of California, it is a mandated report. So I am always really honest with my adolescent patients, especially because they're the ones that usually don't want anybody to tell, that by law, I have to tell. But just because I have to make the report doesn't mean that you have to agree to engage in the investigation with law enforcement. So if law enforcement gets the report, then they'll try to make contact with the child. If the child's like, I don't want anything to happen, they can't force the child victim to move forward with any sort of law enforcement investigation, and then it pretty much doesn't move forward. The one exception being child abuse when it's a family member or a guardian. The child doesn't have to be a willing participant in that, just because of the power dynamics involved in that type of abuse. They can move forward with investigation and prosecution of a caregiver in that scenario. Very basic information that you need is the jurisdiction in which it occurred, because that jurisdiction implies who you make the report to. So if it happened in Riverside County, then you have to report to Riverside Sheriff. If it happened in San Diego County, then there's multiple different entities it could be reported to depending on where the event happened. But if you don't have a person or a perpetrator, it's going to be almost impossible for that investigation to move forward.
How do you figure out the jurisdiction as like a dummy like me, just your average person?
So a really simple way to do it is say, where were you when that happened?
Mm-hmm.
And then the child will usually tell you, oh, well, I was at the park or I was at my grandma's house. Well, which park were you at? Where does grandma live? And that can give you basic jurisdictional information. I try to get that information up front before the kid shuts down in order to complete my mandate. Primarily, the reason that we report is because victims aren't in isolation. Mm-hmm. So anytime there's a child victim, there's at minimum 20 other child victims. So for every one child that discloses sexual abuse or sexual assault, on average, there's 20 other victims who haven't disclosed. So what we really want to do is make sure that is reported so that we protect other children as well. So potential future victims. And that's another thing that I like to talk to the kids about is how brave they are for telling, number one, and how much of a hero they can be to another child who is going to potentially be saved from the same type of outcome.
That is a very compelling point, to not be afraid to report suspected abuse, because you could potentially be helping a lot of children. So what do you actually do if you suspect a child is being harmed? Here's what I want every parent to know. You don't have to be certain. You just have to be concerned. If something doesn't sit right with you, if you see a bruise that seems unusual, if you hear a child talk about something that makes you pause, or if you notice behaviors that raise red flags, it's okay to report it. You're not making an accusation. You're just starting a process that allows professionals to step in and evaluate the situation safely. Every state has a child abuse reporting system, and there's also a national 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week hotline you can call. It's run by Childhelp, and the number is 1-800-4A-CHILD. And that's 1-800-422-4453. You can call anytime, day or night, and talk with someone who's trained to help. They're going to walk you through what to say, how the system works, and what happens next. And yes, you can remain anonymous in most cases. If you'd rather look up your local child protective services directly, there's a great website you can check out. It's childwelfare.gov. They have a state-by-state list of reporting hotlines so you can find the right number where you live. When you make a report, try to give as much detail as you can, and that might include the child's name, their age, the names of their caregivers or parents, what you saw and what you heard that worried you, and most importantly, when and where it happened. But again, you don't need proof. You just need a reason to be concerned. That's enough to get someone trained to look into it. I know this can feel uncomfortable or even scary, but remember, reporting suspected abuse is not about getting someone in trouble. It's about protecting a child. You don't have to investigate. You just have to speak up. And if you're ever looking for more support or resources, check out the website childhelphotline.org. There's also a website that you can contact people for sexual abuse support, and that's RAINN.org, RAINN.org. And the last resource I have is stopitnow.org, which is a great site with resources for families and educators. Don't be afraid. You might just protect a child or many children. For more from the Pediatrician Next Door, find me on the web at pediatriciannextdoorpodcast.com. If you've got a question about the weird things kids do, send an email to hello@pediatriciannextdoorpodcast.com for a chance to hear your voice on the show. I'm Dr. Wendy Hunter, and I'm the Pediatrician Next Door. This show is produced by Red Rock Music. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever it is you're listening. I'll be back next time with more.